the natural inclination is for companies to immediately jump to how can real-time and Gen AI make my products stickier or make my products more attractive or make my products generate more revenue, which I think there's a ton of opportunity in that space. I think wireless is no exception. But also, how do you make your employees into superheroes?
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Accolite Podcast, where we focus on industry leaders as they share their unique experiences that shape their careers, the lessons learned along the way, and their perspectives on the latest tech trends, leadership, and strategy. I'm your host, Manoj Jazra, and I lead global marketing and strategy at Accolite. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Cody Sanford as our very special guest. Cody is an accomplished technology executive who previously served as T-Mobile's Executive Vice President, CIO, and Chief Product Officer, leading their product and technology vision. During his 2 decades journey at T-Mobile, he played a pivotal role in spearheading the integration, planning, and public company readiness effort for the successful merger of T-Mobile and Metro by T-Mobile. In this episode, we'll be discussing Cody's journey at T-Mobile, his experience in leading the company's product and technology strategy, and his insights on the challenges and opportunities in the technology sector. And I know there's a ton of them across the board. So Cody, it's so great to have you as our guest. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Manoj. Great to be here.
So first question for you. You've had this awesome career at T-Mobile, and you started off, obviously, you were right in the weeds, and you made your way up all the way to CIO and Chief Product Officer. We'd love to kind of pick some moments as you kind of made your way through and have you talk through your journey at T-Mobile.
Sure. I'd love to. Pleasure to be here. So 2 decades is a lot to cover in a single podcast, so I'll do my best to make this a short version of the story. But I have been in telecom since I graduated college in 94. I got blessed to get into a small boutique consulting firm right out of college that was kind of on the forefront of both the domestic wireless boom, early boom. I mean, it was still... we were still using big brick Motorola's when I got out, but the early boom and also international. So I got dipped in the mobile world at a very young age. And one of my customers in this consulting firm was a company called Western Wireless, which was a predecessor to VoiceStream Wireless, which was acquired by Deutsche Telekom and eventually became the T-Mobile that everyone knows today. And so as a customer, I got to know the leadership team very well at T-Mobile, specifically on the network engineering side of the house. So when it was time for me to decide to get some real life experience out of consulting in the operations world, I called up my former clients and asked them to become my bosses. And they were kind enough to invite me in the house. And my first 7 years at T-Mobile was spent in the network engineering side of the house, which was predominantly focused in building cell sites, our outside plant and wireless, getting switching centers, mobile switching offices up and running, and then growing the networks as we added customers and expanded into new territory. But I think it's helpful to understand kind of where we were, because we talk more about the journey. This is going to be a kind of a repetitive theme, but T-Mobile was always kind of the new entrant in the market. And as such, it was less capitalized and behind. So we were always having to do things cheaper and faster. But when I started, it was no different. We were, at the time, the U.S. wireless industry was kind of in a race between CDMA and GSM, and there was no GSM coverage in places like Chicago or places like Dallas. So if you landed with the GSM phone in one of those cities, there was no coverage, not bad coverage, there's no coverage. You literally could not make a phone call. So we had a lot of work to do. So when I was brought on board, my job was to help roll up companies we were buying, like companies like OmniPoint and Aerial, and also to launch new coverage in large cities with no coverage. So I spent a number of years doing that. I ended up spending some great years in New York, and then ended up being the regional vice president of the South, which kind of had everything from West Texas, north to Oklahoma, then across to the Floridas, north of Florida. And I spent quite a bit of time doing that. And then we were, I know everyone's talking about 5G today, but if you can believe it, we were well behind on 3G at the time, well behind on 3G. And mobile data at the time was still kind of a future hope. And many people didn't even see the need for large mobile data. It's kind of weird to say now with the age of iPhones and Google products and how much time we spend on our wireless networks. But at the time, it was still predominantly a voice exclusive product. Texting was still being done on, QWERTY keyboards on your phone. So, but anyway, I came up to run the national 3G launch. And when I was launching our 3G network, we happened to coincide the launch of the network with the first Android phone, or the G1, which was the evolution of the Sidekick, which your older listeners will remember and your younger listeners will have to look up. But the Sidekick was the predecessor to the Android product. So we launched that, and I got to get involved a little bit on the product side of the house. And then my job kind of evolved after that. And I moved into a host of executive roles, capital prioritization, and a little bit of work on the product and product innovation side of the house. And then I had, just like anyone with a tenured career, I got to work with some exceptionally amazing leaders who at certain times in my career took big risks on me. And one of those individuals, his name is Jim Alling. He was the former international president of Starbucks, and he became our chief operating officer. And he was an exceptional leader and someone who had a lot of confidence and trusted me probably more than he should have. And anyway, he asked me if I might be interested in trying something different, and offered me a chance to go lead one of our sales organizations, which was completely new front for me. And I jumped in, and basically we broke the company up into 4 P&Ls, but it was the West region's retail, indirect, and B2B, small market B2B effort. And I got to go be a retail leader, which was, I had to slap the trainee badge on my shirt and go learn what retail was all about. But I had an absolutely fantastic time doing that. And then after that, got into some large scale cost optimization and transformation programs with T-Mobile. Eventually got asked to lead the Metro by T-Mobile integration, which you mentioned in your intro, which was a fantastic experience. And because of all the work I've been doing in transformation and integration, we got pretty intimate with our systems and our back-end systems. And we were on the precipice at the time for having to really push forward in a major transformative effort in our systems front, and was asked to come lead the CIO as CIO, and then spent a number of years doing that, and then did my best to kind of squeeze the daylight out between the software and the product experience for our customers, and took on the chief product officer role. And that my tenure at T-Mobile ended a couple of years ago, April. It was a fantastic run, and finished just after the Sprint merger concluded, and the first year of the Sprint integration was wrapped up. And since then, I've been doing really exciting work and interesting work in the board space and board advisor space with companies in the software and software services. And I've been blessed with a great run in a great industry, and I have had just amazing people to work with and teams over the last couple of decades. And I just feel really privileged. I guess we'll leave it there.
Super cool journey. I think it's just under 20 years or so as you made your way from the variety of different roles at T-Mobile. One of the interesting things you said there was, like, you're an engineer at your heart, and then you obviously were making your way to aspects of product, and even you went into the sales space as well. Can you just give some kind of color into, for all listeners as they kind of progress into different kind of career aspirations, how important it is to get the versatility and the differentiated skills versus just trying to be in kind of one sector or one specific type of role in their entire career? What did that variability give you, and how did that support you as you went to eventually become CIO?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of the questions I was most frequently asked when I was doing town halls, because I did have a very nonlinear career path at T-Mobile and had a unique set of experiences which served me. I won't for a second pretend like this is advice for everyone to follow. I'll share what it meant to me. Ultimately, I think getting as close to your customer in kind of every way that they interact with your product is exceptionally helpful as you move through an organization, because at some level, even in the most traditional back office functions, having a rich appreciation for what you're building and what you're selling to your customers and how they experience it, both all the good and all the bad, makes your ability to apply what you're doing towards the betterment of the customer, which ultimately is the betterment of the company. So, I started network engineering in wireless, like many companies. The network is the product. in wireless. The cell sites that are put up and the switching offices that are built, those are the product. I mean, the product is how the customer interacts with the network. So I couldn't get any closer to the product, and understanding the complexities and challenges with how that happens and the unique natures of wireless and how the customers interact with it was, I think, for me, the most important underpinning for everything I did in my career. But then understanding from the sales side of the house, again, these are the individuals who are interacting with your customers every single day. They're in retail stores, they're knocking on small business doors. They are the ones who are interacting with our dealer partners and trying to push our product, and they're getting information in real time about, how is the product priced? How is it packaged? How is it in simple things like returning and logistics and all these dimensions, which really kind of in totality create the customer experience. So by the time I made it to actual product and systems, I thought I had a pretty good handle on what each of my counterparts in the organization were facing, and more importantly, what the customers were facing. So you could bias all of your decisions, from who you were hiring to how you were organizing to where you chose to invest your time and money and energy. All of those things were bent towards customer experience. And I hope that it made a positive difference for T-Mobile. But I would say, kind of to your question about careers, I don't know how anyone goes through the career and moves up into especially large executive roles until they have that deeper appreciation for the customer. And you can get that in a vertical as well. Some companies are built that way, but for me, it just provided so much rich tapestry to make better decisions. It also, I think this is probably important for people starting off in their careers. One of the things that everyone kind of knows coming out of school is your personal networks are everything. And in large companies, that's no different. And if you imagine a world where you get to work in lots of different departments with up-and-coming leaders, as you evolve in a company, all those leaders become your peers in different groups, and you have a rapport and you have an understanding with one another that I think allows you to make much better decisions as a team because you have a common understanding. And those networks are still important for me today, even after I left the company. And those are incredibly more challenging to cultivate if you spend all of your time with one group of people. So that's how it helped me. And I hope it benefited the company and the customers for T-Mobile.
I'm really sure it did. And the perspective on understanding the customer is so important. A little bit of background, me and you and I've got a bit of a telco background. I used to work at Shaw Communications at leading their digital experiences. It's a Western Canada carrier now owned by Rogers. But the amount of time and value that you get, that I got double jacking with like a call center agent, with whether it was with a billing related issue or a technical issue, or doing a ride along in a truck to install internet services, or even working at the retail centers and understanding the problems that customers potentially have as they bring hardware and equipment back. It gives you such deeper understanding of your customer and the way that they perceive your business. And actually the other thing that was beneficial for us was that it gives trust in your end stakeholders when you're trying to build experiences, whether it's product experiences, knowledge experiences. They at least trust that you have context that you're building them. You're not kind of from the ivory tower, you're building these capabilities and just passing them on to the end users who are internal stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I think really, really insightful and so true. One of the things that evolved from that experience, and I think you'll find this in most good product or great product companies, is, the teams that helped our product managers and product teams develop products were often frontline employees. We built these groups that we would rotate from our retail and care contact center facilities, and they would become, for a year, we would second them to our product teams at headquarters, and they would be in there testing and giving feedback and helping the product manager understand how customers were likely to interact with it and how the front line was going to interact it in simple things like how it was provisioned or how it was sold or how it was priced or how it was positioned. And you just, those, even the knowledge that that's what you should be doing, I think only comes from experiencing how different it really is working in the headquarters and working in the front line, and then the front line having to face those customers every single day. It's an easy thing to ignore when you're thousands of miles away from those interactions.
Very interesting. As we switch gears a little bit, one of the questions that I was wanting to ask you was around the Un-carrier brand that T-Mobile launched. Were you a big part of that? Well, what did that mean for the organization? And could you just describe why T-Mobile went that way? Was it a differentiation play? Was it purely brand? Was it purely for self-service? How did you guys land on that, and how did that get implemented?
Yeah. Well, I would love Manoj to take credit for the uncarrier, but that was a evolution from some exceptionally bright leaders, including our former CEO, John Ledger. But there was a very large group of people that kind of helped bring that to life. I was kind of more on the how do you help bring the uncarrier to life after it got launched in customer interactions. But I'll spend a minute on the uncarrier kind of more broadly, because I do think it's a really pivotal moment for T-Mobile, and one that probably it's the most important inflection point for the company in the last couple decades. T-Mobile, as I mentioned earlier, was the underdog. And I don't mean underdog in like root for your home team. I mean underdog in terms of severely undercapitalized, less spectrum than Verizon and AT&T, really limited in its ability to compete in the market outside of a value position. Value being price, which, as anyone who's competed on price knows, that's a hard strategy to sustain for any period of time and differentiate yourself. So just to share a moment, the uncarrier, remember when the T-Mobile didn't have access to the iPhone for a number of years after the launch of the iPhone, it was severely spectrum limited, and it also didn't have an ability to have a major prepaid presence. So when John Ledger started there, he kind of brought all three of those elements together and then juiced it with the uncarrier. So the iPhone came into play. After the AT&T broke up, we had the largest breakup fee in the history of, in the history of U.S. market. We had a $3 billion breakup fee that AT&T paid. And also one of the things people don't know too much about is that in addition to the $3 billion, AT&T was forced to divest a large chunk of 600 megahertz spectrum, which is a spectrum that was used by T-Mobile in earnest to launch its 5G network. And then the Metro purchase. So the iPhone, those capital infusions, the spectrum, and Metro all came together. And then the kind of the genius of what John Ledger brought was he needed to build a relationship with a customer that was on more than price. So this idea of the uncarrier was, we are part of a broken industry, and the uncarrier is kind of the salve for the wound, and it's going to start by doing something really controversial and revolutionary, which is listen to the customer. So the entire company was bent around that idea. And it wasn't branding, it was really an ethos in the company, which is everything was as close to the customer as you could get the experience. And that went down to John would, just like you said, he would jack into calls, but he would, he created this almost one-on-one relationship with millions of customers. And every decision and every executive meeting was about real experiences that real customers were having. And then all of the product innovations stemmed from that tenet, right? So everything that we did in pricing, everything that we did in contract innovation and calling innovation, international, anything that we did was about listening to customers and then giving them what they asked for. So that was the foundation for the uncarrier, and the entire company, every leader in the company and every frontline employee embraced that mission. And it also allowed, from a marketing perspective, to create, if you will, enemies, right? Which I think is a pretty important part for the underdog. It allowed us to cast AT&T and Verizon as these big, slow, corporate, profit-driven enterprises that didn't care about the customer experience. So it allowed us to punch well above our weight. And, it was much words in the beginning as it was action. And then, but the money that I referenced earlier from AT&T plus the spectrum, plus a really good leadership team allowed us to kind of catch up with actual product experiences along with the hyperbole. So anyway, it was a pretty cool thing to be a part of.
Watching it from the outside, it just felt like T-Mobile for other carriers and other telecommunication companies just became the gold standard of brand and customer service, and just to be able to rally their internal teams across major challenges across the board. So that's what it looked like from our end. I'm sure from your perspective, you guys were running a mile a minute to accomplish all these things. Now, the underlying question I have for you here is when you start to build a company ethos, and the uncarrier was one that yourselves and the leadership team and your CEO were driving, what was it that made everyone catch on to it internally that drove the success? Because you guys could have launched a Uncarrier brand, and obviously there's times when you launch something that has branding and has obviously mission, vision, values associated with it, and they kind of fall flat. But what was it about what you did that made it turn and really catch the wave that was required to get ahead of your competitive set, because of the fact that your team members and your employees all ran with it as well?
This is the ultimate chicken and egg question, but I think I would break it down to something really simple, which is nothing promotes winning like winning. And I would say that the early success we had with the Uncarrier, both in terms of customer, how the customers received it at an emotional level, and I think more importantly, how that receipt translated into results, namely growth in earnings, growth in revenue, growth in customers. As soon as you start posting some major scores on the board, it's really easy to rally a team around it. So that kind of winning was the central, everything I'm about to say after that, I don't think would have been anywhere near as potent without winning. Because if we weren't winning, we would have had to change our strategy. But because we were winning, it was very, very easy to get everyone to kind of buy into what the Uncarrier meant across the board, whether you were in human resources or you were doing accounts payable or you were doing product or you were in our care organization or our retail organizations, you embraced it. And it was like any great culture, it was everything. Our CEO was brash and he was bold and he was trying to change this kind of stodgy telecom image into more of a kind of a rebel image. So everyone was donning the t-shirts and the jeans and we started allowing retail to, have tattoos and piercings to be more reflective of the community that they were, as opposed to putting them in polo shirts and khakis. And it really kind of just brought everyone on board into a common mission. And to me, that was the essence of how it worked. We got some early wins, and that bought buy-in from the employees. And then if you think about it from a board and investor standpoint, which is always important to understand too, and especially in an exceptionally high, capital-intensive industry like telecom, getting billions and billions of incremental dollars to go after more spectrum was contingent upon us showing disproportionate growth in the sector. So we had to go deliver results in order for us to secure the financials to go after the additional spectrum, which then allowed us to push through it hard into the 4G and then ultimately into our 5G position. So it was all kind of linked together. Hopefully that made sense.
I did, for sure. And to me, it also seemed like, in addition to capital and spectrum, which is always critical, you can't move forward without the actual infrastructure in place, your position in the market as a bit of an underdog also allowed you to ride the wave appropriately. So you had this kind of driven, hungry mentality, and you weren't kind of displacing any of that energy to drive past your competitive set. And I think you use this tidal wave to kind of get where you got. And obviously the brand and the personality of your leadership team definitely showed in the marketplace as well. So that's a super cool inside story that you just shared. As we kind of pivot into, you mentioned 3G before, you mentioned 4G. Tell us about the journey to 5G, what that meant for T-Mobile, and obviously probably a lot of challenges along the way. Can you talk about some moments around that?
Yeah, I'll spend a few minutes on the 5G craziness, and then maybe I'll spend a little bit of time too, but it makes sense, on what it meant from a systems and product standpoint, because it's, I'd love to take credit for the entire 5G evolution, but that was burdened mostly by our Neville Ray and the network team. They were years and years of work to get there. But if everyone kind of thinks back to the move from 2G to 3G and the move from 3G to 4G and the move from 4G to 5G, every one of those kind of technology leaps was preceded by years, sometimes, of hype. So oftentimes, in fact, every one of those, the products that took advantage of the technology were either slow to follow, were behind the actual technology standard, and way behind the technology hype. The iPhone and the Android phone came out well after the 3G networks launched. And as you think about 4G and LTE and then advanced LTE and then eventually 5G, it's the same, finding products to actually create the experience for customers significantly lagged. But from the 4G to 5G for T-Mobile specifically, it was the first time in the history of the company that with the merger of Sprint, the company had a chance to be the leader, the absolute leader in the US for 5G, and leader in both capital spectrum, meaning having the most spectrum in the right places, which was the most important dimension, meaning having spectrum to perform the best in terms of both rural, suburban, and urban performance, and then being able to deploy it fastest. I mean, it was one of those like dream moments, right? Where everything that you've been working so hard for the kind of combat in the previous 20 years of being behind in spectrum, behind in network, behind in capitalization, you had a chance to really stick it to the competition and be the first to market. And not only the first to market, but be the first to market in a position that you could protect. So with the 600 megahertz we got from AT&T plus spectrum that was acquired along the way in a number of federal auctions, coupled with the kind of amazing spectral assets that we got when we combined Sprint and T-Mobile, and without a doubt, the best engineering team in the industry. T-Mobile was, in the last 5 years, was able to like really put some distance between AT&T and Verizon. And the big challenge was, I mean, in addition to getting the networks built, was also repositioning the brand in consumers' minds from being a Me Too coverage to being a Me First coverage. And if you watch the branding and what was done to kind of cement the idea of T-Mobile being a network leader became really, really important. So all the branding and the discussions about network, it was kind of a first. And then, the stats brought it up. All the network statistics that gets published by various independent organizations started to show like we had by far the dominant speed positions in the marketplace. So that kind of was on the network side of the house. On the product side of the house, we then had to figure out how to bring those experiences to life and create experiences that reflected the network. And that was what the rest of the team was focused on. But the real core to 5G was taking all those individual ingredients that we were able to secure in the mid 2000s and start to really put them to work in a way that we never had before.
It must have been quite the challenge as you guys were debating the right ways to launch this thing, because obviously having a market position as a leader is one of the best places to be in, but also you could kind of mess it up if you don't land it with the right kind of approach and sequencing as well. What did that dialogue look like as you guys were ready to push the 5G position to market with your product, your network, and your brand at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's also a delicate balance because you get some leeway between what you crow about and what the customer experience is, but not much, right? Eventually, people judge you on actually what they experience, not what you tell them in advertising that they're experiencing. And nothing helps your company or hurts your company as fast as word of mouth. So it was really important that we kind of got that timing right. And also understanding that coverage is a personal experience and it needs to be, meaning that your experience of T-Mobile as the product is based on where you live and how you use your phone and your connected devices. And the internal debates were always, how fast is fast enough before you start calling something 5G? We could get 5G on the phone. When you see 5G on your phone, that's not, you can put 5G slap it on the phone without having a remarkable speed experience. And many of our competitors did just that. They got 5G, the technology launched, but the actual bandwidth experience wasn't unique for customers. So we really resisted that. It was a lot of debate about whether, do you really want to show up 5G on the phone and kind of beat Verizon AT to market on kind of visually, but not be able to back it up. We made a decision to not do that, and we wouldn't put 5G in there until the customer's experience matched the expectations that we were generating in the marketplace. So that was a big, healthy debate. And then the other big questions that came about was like, do you charge more for it? Is it an experience that, how do you think about it in terms of what customers are going to be paying for? And also, if you use 5G on, if you talk about 5G on devices that aren't capable of supporting 5G, which was most devices, launched it, how do you kind of not make your existing customers feel left out if they have old phones. So all of that got factored into how we thought about bringing products to market, how we messaged, and how we equipped our frontline teams to kind of work our customers through that 5G transition. So you can imagine each one of those was a heated discussion. But again, this is, I get most people who are listening to this who work for really successful small or large companies know that if you have a strong anchor in what your values are for the company, and it makes all these decisions much, much easier. And because the Uncarrier wasn't just a marketing tag, it was an actual cultural core, it was easy to bounce decisions against those tenets about what would a customer say? How is this going to affect our customers? How is it going to thereby affect the people who are closest to our customers, namely our front line? And then every decision could kind of get built from those building blocks. And that was what was made it easier for us anyway to navigate the early days of 5G.
Super cool. And what an awesome way to have like a guiding light to basically refine every decision based on that value that everyone bought into. I have one last question for you. Moving away from T-Mobile, just thinking about the technology in general, what's hitting us right now in June 2023, going to summer, is generative AI is upon us in a major way. And I'm sure as a technologist and a leader of product, you probably haven't seen something ramp up this fast before. I haven't seen it since ever, but I just want to hear your thoughts in terms of what do you believe generative AI means? How do you think it's going to impact different sectors? And how should CIOs take advantage of it most effectively going forward?
Yeah, that's another hour.
In part 2, Cody talks about generative AI.
Yeah, that's right. Well, first, I couldn't agree with you more. It's pretty crazy. People ask me like, have you ever seen this before? I was like, well, I said, maybe when the, early days of the .com and right around the launch of iOS and Android, you might have seen like a kind of a similar craze, but it is pretty remarkable. I mean that from, how big companies are thinking about it to how Silicon Valley's is kind of going crazy around it. And the promise of the potential and the actual potential, it's, trying to discern hype and reality is, in the midst of this craziness is hard to do. But to specifically answer your question, I have spent quite a bit of time talking to companies that are kind of getting into the space and leveraging the existing technology and also trying to think of creative ways to bring it to bear for small and large companies in the last few months in particular, but probably the last 6 months. And I'm not sure where I fall on the continuum of it's going to change the world and we live forever and it's never going to be the same to it's just a bunch of smoke. But I'm probably in the middle of that spectrum. But what I have seen suggests that there is really an amazing amount of promise, both internally and externally companies. And the question was, how should CIOs be thinking about it? And again, for most companies, a CIO plays both, especially in large enterprises, plays both a customer experience leader role, meaning how do you ensure the technologies and the software that ensure that the customers experience the products in the best way possible, and the internal experiences, which is how do you ensure that the employees in the company and the partners of your company are best equipped to delight the customer. I mean, they have both of those hats. And I think Gen AI will be important for CIOs to have both of those. I think the natural inclination is for companies to immediately jump to how can real time and Gen AI make my products stickier or make my products more attractive or make my products generate more revenue, which I think there's a ton of opportunity in that space. I think wireless is no exception. But also, how do you make your employees into superheroes? Whether they work in accounts receivable or they're in logistics and supply chain, or they're in analytics and strategy, or they're in M&A and corp dev. Like, there is so much that Gen AI can do on both fronts, which I think makes it a little daunting for CIOs, but kind of on the surface, meaning things that I think are I'm starting to see some quick wins. I mean, there's a lot of Gen AI kind of already in practice. I'm starting to get in practice in terms of, giving customers semi-real-time feedback and how they're interacting in digital. assisted and unassisted channels. I think you're going to see a lot of evolution in that, meaning think chatbots on steroids or, really, really thoughtful digital support as you move through shopping, digital shopping experiences, or think customer care assisted with Gen AI. I mean, all these ways that today are more timely, and they're spaces where most customers don't have magical experience with your brand, right? They have less than magical experience with your brand. And with thoughtful use of that, you can really shift that customer interaction. And I'm speaking a little bit in telecom now because that's what we've been talking about, but you can expand that to almost any product. But equally as powerful, I think if you start thinking about the exceptional amount of data that every company has internally and start thinking about how Gen AI can unlock your finance department to do better forecasting and better propensity modeling and prediction modeling, how your analyst teams can start using language models for querying, you name it, whether I want to look at experiencing a new product or how customers might react to a particular new direction, or querying companies' data for patterns and trends, which today is hard to do, not just because the state of data internally in organizations, but because it's very timely and cost intensive to do massive correlations that these LLMs can make so much more efficient. So it's a long way of saying, I think there's a world of opportunity. And what I'm seeing right now in coming out of Silicon Valley and other areas is companies that are kind of taking those ideas and building really, really skinny, easy to deploy, easy to integrate applications that sit on top of the data and can be used pretty effortlessly. And there are new areas too, which tend to be things where you didn't like to spend a lot of time, like compliance, auditing, very intensive, data intensive and human intensive things that are not huge value to your customer and to your investors, but are, major weights on companies that can be greatly enhanced or made more efficient through the introduction of AI.
Yeah, it's a very robust answer you gave. And obviously there's multiple threads there. A few of the takeaways that I picked up was there's kind of two factors around employee and customer experience. On the employee side, giving them like the hero suit, so the Iron Man suit, to make them more efficient so that they are more effective and they can add more value to their roles. On the customer side, I think you had said something which was super interesting. Like a lot of people and companies are going to try to jam things in there as if everything is generative AI, and many things are just actually just AI and machine learning models. And are they truly actually generating value with content and data that can actually support customer experience? I think that was a really valuable takeaway as well. And I think the last one was the concept of curiosity and testing, as every company is sitting on data to ensure that these lightweight and agile application can be built so that you can test your way through. I think those are the three things I picked up along that answer. So thank you for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space right now. And the other thing too, which I have learned the hard way sometimes, in the great way, other ways, which is this is not a time for CIOs and companies to be insular in their thinking, meaning that I think on these forefronts, new tech, how inclusive can you be in bringing other companies, partners, ideas, people into how you're leveraging it, and really fighting against the kind of, I think, institutional tendencies to kind of stare at their navels and take the tech and then start to deploy it, as opposed to thinking about community and partnerships. I think it's too easy to miss out on that. And I think one of the people I'm starting to see kind of generate the most traction are those that are being really inclusive. They're spending time with peers in the space. They're looking for people who are doing it right. They're, reaching out to other CIOs. They're bringing in great partners that, they're not just technology partners who are selling the software and software licensing. They're actually people who are kind of pushing the boundaries. And I think that's going to be really, really, really important to cultivate, because there aren't those areas right now. Those communities aren't dominant yet, and I think it's incumbent upon, especially large enterprise leaders, to make sure that they're helping foster that.
Yeah, that's very insightful. There is no playbook for this yet, and we do have to reach out to each other, make inclusive environments, that we are treading a path that makes sense strategically for all of our organization. That's a wonderful way to close this episode. So Cody, absolute pleasure having you on our podcast. And we loved hearing about your stories across T-Mobile and your insights into technology and generative AI. Humble thank you for taking the time out of your busy day. I know how many different kind of things you have going on. So really, massive thank you to you.
It was a pleasure, Manoj, and happy to anytime.
Wonderful. So to all our listeners, thank you again for tuning in and joining us. Stay tuned for another interesting conversation in our next episode. Until then, this is Manoj for the Accolite Podcast, signing off.